You know that incredibly frustrating thing that happens where you have a simple task, something that really truly should only take you about 30 minutes, but it mysteriously stretches and expands until it completely devours your entire hour? Yeah, it happens to the best of us, and honestly, it happens all the time in the workplace. Well, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to tackle a brilliant piece of research from Roya on something called the shrinking theory. We're going to dive into how actually giving ourselves less time leads to massively more focus. I mean, it's a great question, right? Just think about your calendar for a second. Think about all those hour-long meetings you sit through every single week. How often do those really require a full 60 minutes? Usually the actual work, the real decision-making, happens in like the first 15 to 20 minutes. And the rest of it is just filler. We sit there, our energy drops, we start watching the clock. But the fascinating flip side to this is how deadlines kind of magically boost our productivity. When that clock is ticking, suddenly we know exactly what to do. So to solve this meeting fatigue, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll cover the shrinking theory explained, look at why long meetings fail, walk through 6 steps to shrink meetings, dive into the psychology of time, and wrap up with your next meeting challenge. All right, part 1, the shrinking theory explained, or as I like to think of it, Parkinson's law in action. The core principle at play here is Parkinson's law. You've probably heard this one. It states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. It's literally a universal rule that dictates our daily tasks, and it really hits hard when it comes to scheduled meetings. If you book an hour, the conversation will take an hour. A really straightforward 20-minute decision will somehow stretch and warp to fill that entire 60-minute block because, well, the time is just sitting there. But the shrinking theory asks a really powerful question. What actually happens if we intentionally limit that time?
Think about it like this. If you give yourself a 2-hour deadline to finish a report, you are going to take the full 2 hours. You'll go check your email, you'll grab another coffee, you'll probably overthink a single paragraph for 10 minutes. But what if you only have a 30-minute deadline? The change is instant. You prioritize immediately, you cut out all the fluff, and you work with absolute laser focus. By intentionally shrinking the time, you basically force yourself to get to the point faster, focus on the key decisions, and walk away with clear action items.
Which brings us to part 2. Why long meetings fail. These are the real productivity killers.
Look, the harsh reality is that when meetings run too long, they actually do more harm than good. First, you get this massive loss of focus. People start checking their phones under the table, right? Second, all that extra padding just invites off-topic discussions, tangents that have literally nothing to do with the actual goal. Third, and this is a huge one, delayed decisions. More time does not mean better decisions. It usually just leads to endless overthinking rather than taking action. And finally, you get lower productivity across the board because an hour spent talking in circles is an hour you didn't spend doing actual deep work. The result? Way more follow-ups, slower execution, and a ton of wasted time.
So let's fix it. Part 3, 6 steps to shrink meetings. This is your actionable playbook.
Roya research outlines this incredibly effective 6-step methodology for putting the shrinking theory to work. You're going to cut the time in half, set a hard stop, start with the biggest issue, send an agenda in advance, ban delays, and assign actions before you end. Let's break these down so you can use them today.
Step 1, cut meeting time in half. Seriously, if you normally book 60 minutes, book 30. If you usually book 30, challenge yourself to do it in 15. And 15 is a highly intentional number here. Google's famous stand-up meetings, they last exactly 15 minutes. Why? Because it completely eliminates any room for small talk and forces the entire team to get straight to the point. It creates this amazing environment of urgency and efficiency.
And if you want an even more extreme example of time cutting, look at Warren Buffett. He has a rule. Take 5 minutes to define the meeting's top objectives. 5 minutes. He uses this intense time constraint because top performers know that getting absolute clarity right up front prevents hours of wasted time down the line. I mean, if you can't define what you're doing in 5 minutes, you really shouldn't be sitting in a room for an hour.
Moving on to step 2, which is all about setting a hard stop. And here's the absolute best trick for this. Use a visible countdown timer. A lot of meetings just run over because, well, we're polite. We let people ramble on. But by setting a firm end time and putting a literal ticking clock in the room, or throwing it up on the screen share, you create visual urgency. Everyone sees the time vanishing. It naturally holds the whole room accountable and keeps the conversation aggressively on track.
Now for steps 3 and 4. Shorter meetings mean you have to have significantly better preparation. You must send an agenda in advance, and you must start with the biggest issue. And by the way, an effective agenda doesn't just say discuss marketing. No, it says key decision to be made. It lists the exact data needed, and it demands actionable next steps. When you tackle the biggest issue right out of the gate, you make sure the most critical decisions aren't being rushed in the final 2 minutes while everyone's packing up their laptops.
And that leads us perfectly into step 5, which is tackling that phrase that haunts offices everywhere. Let's circle back on this next time. You have to ban the delay habit. Meetings exist to drive action. So instead of just punting the conversation to next week, look at your team and ask this exact question. What decision can we make right now? What is the immediate next step? If you combine that with step 6, which is spending the final few minutes summarizing takeaways and assigning specific deadlines, your meetings will completely transform from passive chats into actual execution engines.
Okay, so why is this so effective? Part 4, the psychology of time. I really love this breakdown because it proves that shrinking time fundamentally shifts how the human brain approaches work. Look at this. When the time condition is time pressure, the psychological result is sharper focus, quicker thinking, and really ruthless prioritization. When you have less time, the result is way less overthinking. It actively cuts off that endless, toxic debate that stalls projects. And when you run tighter meetings, you get significantly more engagement. People literally don't have the time to get bored. The energy levels stay high the entire time. You're not just saving hours, you're increasing mental clarity.
All right, wrapping things up with part 5, your next meeting challenge. Let's put this into practice.
If you take only one single thing away from this explainer today, let it be this equation right here. Less time equals more focus, clearer discussions, and faster decisions. If your team's meetings are feeling dragging, draining, and just unproductive, your answer isn't some fancy new software tool. The answer is to actively shrink the time you're giving them. You will honestly be amazed at how quickly people rise to the occasion when you tighten up those boundaries.
So I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. The very next time you open up your calendar to create an invite, right before you hit send on that default 60-minute block, stop. Just pause and ask yourself, can we do this in half the time? Try it out this week. Watch how quickly you get your workday back. Thanks so much for exploring this with us, and we'll see you next time.